Welcome back to the channel. I'm happy to report that phase one of Project Bad Decision is complete. It's finally received a license plate, it's got insurance, it is legal to drive on the road here in Alberta. In honor of that milestone, I thought we would talk a little bit about what it cost in order to get to this point. We've talked on the channel quite a bit about the value of these cars, about buying one of these cars, what you should look for when you're buying one of these cars. But most of that emphasis has been on sorting out the cars that are junky from the cars that are good and trying to buy a good car. What about if you have an extremely limited budget? Well, one potential way to get a Foxbody is to start with something like this. This car was kind of a worst case scenario. A roller, no engine, no transmission, no seats, partial interior, completely chopped wiring harness, completely chopped fuel system. I mean, really a mess. And then it had a pile of parts. And of course, in the parts bill that came with the car was a whole bunch of stuff that isn't even for the car. I mean, there was stuff that was for Thunderbirds and like not even for a Mustang or for different years of Mustang. So it's quite a pile of stuff to sort through and try and figure out what goes on in the car. And when I bought this project, I kind of eyeballed it and I thought, I'm pretty sure most of a car is here, but you never quite know what you're missing or what's going to be no good. So you're taking it on faith that you can put it back together. I'm not going to lie to you. Putting something like this together is not for the faint of heart. If you're a first-time guy, you have no experience with these cars, and you buy a puzzle like this one was, you're probably not going to be successful. And if you're a guy with more time on his hands than money and some real experience with Foxbodies or whatever car it is you're trying to put together, buying a project car like this could be a good way to get a nice runner for a reasonable amount of money. Let's talk about what really had to happen here in order to get to the stage of having a license plate. It was last registered in British Columbia, the province next door, which means even if you got the car running, it would still have to pass a rigorous out-of-province inspection procedure. This is a procedure that requires checks of everything: seat belt tags, the tags on the glass in the car, every function on the car that's for safety has to work. All the lights, wipers, washer, horn. Of course, the mechanical stuff like brakes and so on all have to be working. And this stuff has to meet a good standard. Sometimes if you just buy a 5-year-old car from another province and you have to get an out-of-province inspection on it, there's a bunch of stuff you have to fix or remedy before you can actually go ahead and register it. So starting with one that's all cut up, just a roller, and a lot of systems chopped up is really a worst case type of scenario. But the opportunity there is, because it's a worst case scenario, lots of times you can buy it inexpensively. Now, as I went through the project, I kept receipts. I tried to keep a fairly comprehensive list of the amount of money that I had to spend on the car. And with a project like this, quite often, and as is the case here, there are parts that came with the project that are not actually needed for the project and that you might sell in order to generate some cost recovery to help pay for the stuff that you do need. As I said, it came in one trailer load of junk and the roller on another trailer. Just a complete mess. There's sort of barely a car, but it had promise. It already had a 5-lug conversion. It already had an SN95 spindle and disc brake conversion, had 410 gears, and it kind of looked like there was enough parts to put the car together. All the values I'm going to give are in Canadian dollars. These are something like 40 to 45% higher than an equivalent US dollar value depending on the day. So let's get started. I paid $5,000 for the project. So that was the roller and all the parts. Then it had several major expenditures. And there were no seats. I have some longer term plans for the car, so rather than just say go to the junkyard and put some will-do seats in it out of a wreck or something, I bought some new Corbeau Sports and they cost $1,004 for the seats. The fuel system was completely chopped. I'm pretty sure that this car had had a carb conversion at some point. It didn't even have a Fox Mustang fuel hanger on the fuel tank, so everything had to go. And because I have longer term plans for the car, what I ended up doing was putting in a Sniper Stealth 340 billet with AN fitting hanger and pump assembly, and then all braided hose with AN fittings all the way to the front of the car. In order to make it work with the factory fuel rails, I used the AN to Ford push lock adapter fittings so that we could connect it up to those rails. Fuel systems cost real money, but this setup should carry it forward through a substantial power upgrade as we build the car out. Fuel system parts, looks like I spent $932.16. That's an approximate cost for what a fuel system is in one of these cars from end to end. If you go ahead and do a fuel system in them, you can use my code, which is in the description, to buy some fittings from Evil Energy. It might save you a couple of bucks, and those fittings are probably okay. Although, to be perfectly fair, I didn't use any of them in this car because I didn't have Evil Energy's code before I started the fuel system project. The car didn't come with a drive shaft, but a friend of mine gave me a drive shaft he had sitting around. It just didn't have the yoke for the T5. So I bought a yoke, that was $130. And I had to buy a transmission cross member. I bought a Stifler's, which is a good aftermarket cross member, and it's configurable for a bunch of transmission applications. That cost, I think, $240. And it needed a whole pile of just little things. Heater core, a bunch of heater hose, a clutch quadrant, oil pressure sender, O2 sensor. It needed a transmission mount in addition to the cross member. I think transmission mount was $55 and the clutch quadrant was like $55. It needed a multi-switch for the signal lights and headlights. That was just completely missing. It wasn't just broken, it wasn't with the project at all. So it needed one of those. That was like $116. In order to pass the out of province, it needed a windshield. So I had somebody come to the shop. It's winter time, mobile service and some good glass. It cost me $515 for the windshield. So, and then there was GST federal sales tax that I had to pay on pretty well all of this stuff. So I think I had a total upfront cost on the project in cash money of $8,530. Okay, now cost recovery. I've already sold a few things off. I've tried not to get too crazy with selling stuff off until such time as the car is done or put together as a registered and insured car, in case I accidentally sold something that turned out I really needed. Inexplicably, it had winter tires on it, and they were too big for the car anyway. So I took them off last winter, and I sold those to a guy. I got $300 for those. There was an Explorer intake and an Explorer 65 millimeter throttle, which isn't as good as you think because the linkage is all backwards compared to the Mustang. So a bunch of work is required in order to get it to work right with a Mustang. I got $500 for those parts. For whatever reason, it came with a steering wheel, airbag, and clock spring assembly out of an airbag car, a 90 plus car. I'm not quite sure why those parts were in there, but they weren't needed for this. And some of those parts are actually real hard to come up with, the steering wheel buttons and the clock spring. I sold those to a guy I've known for like 30 years or something like that, probably more like 35 years, who bugged me incessantly for them because he couldn't source them and he had problems with his cruise control on his 91 Mustang. So I got $200 for those. In fairness, I think they go on eBay for quite a bit more. So that was a real friends and family price. If I was, trying to maximize this, I'd have probably sold them on eBay or something like that and got a little bit more money for them. Then you got to ship them somewhere. Who knows? There's a set of Trick Flow twisted wedge cylinder heads that came in with the car. I thought those were one of the jewels of the parts on the project, and I still have them. My original plan for the car was to build it up like this, then maybe do like a heads cam intake build, mainly for your guys' benefit and to build a car that I could have a little fun with next summer maybe, and then move on to something like a Godzilla swap. But I ended up with the Godzilla like last year. It's just been sitting here and I'm getting tired of looking at it. So I decided to go straight to the Godzilla. Plus you've seen me do heads cam intake builds before. It's not really covering any new ground for YouTube. So I'm going to sell those. New, right now, those heads are worth about 2,500 Canadian dollars plus tax. There's also rocker arms and trick flow 670 push rods. I'm going to sell all of that. And I think I'll probably get about $2,000 for the heads, rocker arms, and push rods as good used parts. There's a manual transmission pedal box. I'm not quite sure why that was in this pile of parts, but it was, and actually they're fairly sought after part. I've seen guys want as much as $650 for them, but I've marked it down as I'm going to get about $400 for it. This car is already a manual transmission car, so it's not like I needed the pedal box for it. And it's not like it's an automatic pedal box where if I decided I was going to put an automatic in it down the road, I could just convert it with that. So it's a surplus item. It's something I'll get paid for. And it came with a 5-liter short block, complete short block with pistons, crankshaft, connecting rods. There's an oil pan, front cover, a bunch of sort of miscellaneous stuff that I have actually yet to sort through completely. I've kind of marked that down as worth about $500. I'd say even if you can't just put it together and run it as a pure rebuilder, it's probably worth pretty close to that as a core. So what does that translate into? With my actual expenditures minus my already achieved and expected cost recovery, the cost recovery I have marked down here at $3,900. I have estimated the cost to end up at this stage of the game at $4,630.11. That's pretty cheap. Now, it's not the nicest looking car in the world. In fact, I've never even washed the car. I've never had it outside long enough in good weather to actually wash it or detail it, but the paint is reasonable on the car. It has some clear peel and it has a little rust in the rear trunk drop-offs, but that's the only place. Underneath, this car is really solid. The torque boxes look like new. The lower frame rails under the shock towers are very, very good. They look pristine. The whole car is really, really solid. So for a solid car like this in the marketplace that's a registered and insured car, ready to go, just passing out of province, even has a clean windshield, I think it's worth an easy $10,000, probably between $10,000 and $15,000. So if I was selling the car, I'd probably expect to get like 12 grand for it, something like that. And that's the kind of money you'd have to pay if you were going to buy a car like this out in the marketplace, if you can find one, because a lot of them you can find are pretty junky. Now, how much time did I spend on the project? I don't know. I didn't keep a timesheet. It's not the kind of project that would have been commercially viable. Like if one of you guys brought me a car that was in the state that this one was in and said, turned into a running car, my guess is you'd have been way better off to just buy a really good one and spend the real money in the first place than pay me to recover it. But you don't count the value of your time when you're building it for yourself. If I had my guess, I'd guess I have in the neighborhood of 400 hours in putting it together. It might be less. It depends a little bit on how you calculate your time. Like, do you count the time you spent going to the parts store? Do you count the time you spent searching online for odds and ends? Do you count the phone calls you made trying to find some, used or giveaway stuff to try and keep the cost down on the project? Do you count your commute time to and from the shop each day that you work on the car? I normally keep a timesheet when I do a commercial job, and my process there is I mark down my start and end time when I'm actually working on the car in the shop, and I don't count any of these other things, including the parts store trips. But they take time and they cost money, and so it's the kind of thing you have to consider in terms of your total commitment to get to a working car. Would I recommend that you try something like this? It depends a lot on your skill level. If you're a skilled guy with lots of experience with Fox bodies, lots of times you can find a distressed project like this that you can buy really inexpensively. And if you can put it together and get it to a running car, it's either a fun car for you or it is worth some money to sell. In a world where these cars are commanding 15, 20, 25, 30,000 Canadian dollars in the marketplace for decent examples, this is by far the least costly way to get yourself a running, driving, fun little Fox body. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm going to put up a playlist here of all of the videos related to the project to this stage. I encourage you to have a look through it if you're interested in doing it. Try and get a feel for what it takes to put something like this together. And I'll put up a video that YouTube thinks is the best for you to watch from my channel. I hope you'll come back next time. There's always lots of Mustang and Ford content and other car content on this channel.